Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. Today I am reviewing The Misery House by David Kummer. This is, according to the author, a thriller, but I believe that when there's mutilated deer carcasses involved, that's more of a horror. Regardless, this is all about a small town called New Haven that has this super haunted house, just like mega haunted house, sitting on a hill that kind of casts a pall over everything. At the beginning of the book, we see, well, we don't see the protagonist start a baseball game, but a mom and pop store burns to the ground with people inside, and so everyone's trying to figure out how that happened because this is a very small, sleepy little town that not a lot happens in. Our protagonists are a family of four, a father, mother, daughter, and son, and one of the things that I really liked about this, and I feel like a lot of horrors need to do better, is it makes the characters likable, which I find is very crucial for a horror to up the scare factor, because the more I like the characters, the more scary it is when they're in danger, because the less I want them to die. Not that I ever, well, I take that back. Some antagonists I have wanted to die, but I don't usually want characters to die. But there is an element of, if you purposely make this, fake fictional person annoying or mean, whatever, I'm not pulling as hard for them to live, so them being put in danger isn't as scary. Whereas this one, you have Cliff, Naomi, I'm forgetting the daughter's name, Kaya, and Nate. It was Nate. Yes, I remember names. They all have, hobbies they do with each other, connections with each other. Despite the age gap, the siblings don't hate each other. So it sets up a great dynamic where you definitely want every member of this family to live, even when they're put in dangerous situations. Now, it's not immediately apparent how the burnt down mom and pop shop connects to a creepy haunted house on a hill. And admittedly, I spent a lot of the book going, okay, how are these characters just vibing that it's related? Now, our mom, Naomi, she's had some issues with the house. She decided to go in it once, and there's vague references to the horrors that she faced there and never wants to go back. But everyone else is kind of just like, well, it's a fire. It's a big deal because things don't happen. New Haven is very sleepy. But I was like, okay, it does feel like a stretch how we're going for the haunted house. You also see not an outright abusive relationship. Not exactly. Kaya has a friend, Allison, who gets married to the town douche, Malachi, and they're 19. And even for Midwest standards, as someone who lives in Iowa, that's young. Even though some people would say that me getting married at 25 is young, that's not young for Iowa. 19 still is. And it's one of those, this is going to end badly marriages from the beginning. I think I wrote the phrase, fuck you, Malachi, in my notes probably 3 times. So there's nothing direct on page, but if you're used to seeing that kind of stuff, or the way that kind of stuff usually goes, it might put you on edge like it did me. But regardless, we have a new family that just moved into town. The Dawes, a mother and her 3 kids, and the sheriff, who is paranoid and wants a scapegoat, makes no bones about the fact that he's basically going to go after this family as, the culprits behind the burning of the building, mostly because the eldest of the kids, Smith, 2 last names, Smith Dawes, that's fun, he acts strange. He acts autistic is what he acts like, because they talk about how, he's always wearing headphones and by himself and muttering to himself. Like, I don't know if that's meant to be autism coded, but it's very blatantly autism coded. However, autistic people get othered all the time, so it kind of tracks for realism at least. But I liked that there was some level of angst between the family when it came to the Dawes, because you have Naomi, who is hardcore on the Mrs. Dawes, the mother's side, and you have Cliff, who has grown up in this town his entire life and just doesn't want conflict. He annoyed me a little bit. He had a lot of cowardice in comparison to some of the other characters. I think, he was probably the most cowardly character out of all of them. But Naomi more than made up for that. But as for the actual spooky parts, those are a little bit slower to pick up. Not not very slow. This book is around 230 pages, so nothing takes too long to pick up. But like I said, it took a second before you started making connections between the burning down and the house. But once things started picking up, they really picked up. There was a bike ride turned creepy, and some kind of beast that they can't really see, but they know is running in the woods beside them, like all of that kind of stuff. I love that aspect. There was a creepy, shadowy figures in a bedroom scene that was nice and disturbing. This book had that weird kind of intrigue for me where it's like, I would have to remind myself to stop and take notes because I really wanted to keep reading. Not because I was super enjoying. Well, I was enjoying. Not because I was super happy with what was going on. But I'm like, I have to keep reading because I just need to know how bad it gets. Like I didn't want to push it off because I was afraid the more I pushed off the creepy scene I was in the book, the more my anxiety would spike. So I'm like, I just got to get to the end of it. I got to figure out what horrible thing is going to pop out before I can stop, or else it's going to hang over my head that much longer. Which I guess is to its testament that it inspired those feelings because, thriller, horror, it's kind of meant to do that. I don't care what the cozy horror people say. Horror is meant to unsettle you. That's the point of the genre. So if I'm going, I have to keep reading because I can't, I just need to know, that's an inherent 5-star in itself for a horror, that it actually unsettled you and made you nervous and anxious. But again, like I talked about before, the fact that it built up all of these connections between this family, because they're so, they're in love with each other. Sounds weird to say when you're talking about family members, but they love each other and they have connections with each other, and they lay out all of these, little activities they do together. The siblings going out to the woods together, and the mom and son bike riding together, all of that kind of stuff. And they all go to the son's baseball games. It's really cute. And so when any one of them, usually one or two of them, separated out, I don't think the family really, the family as a whole doesn't really connect and face the danger altogether, although that could be a fun scene moving forward. Anytime one of them was separated out and in danger, or two of them, it was heightened that much more, because you knew, if something happened to them, everyone was going to be devastated. And there is some things left unsaid, undone, mostly because this is, I believe, a trilogy. And this is all about the same house in the same town. And I was kind of bummed because in certain aspects, I wish there'd been more time spent in the actual house. Because when we finally have the climactic scene and one of our protagonists, enters the house, it felt like there wasn't quite enough. I considered briefly taking off a star for that, but I ended up not, purely because I recognize that this is a trilogy and you don't want to reveal everything in the first book. If the haunted house is the centerpiece, then you want to leave as much of that centerpiece open for future books. And there is a new character introduced that they make some vague reference to causing issues in the future. I also loved the setting. The setting was a character in itself. The way that both the town and the woods around the town are described was really nice. I liked how deeply descriptive the descriptions of the forest around it were, and how much Kaya and Nate loved just wandering around in there and exploring it. And also, I was intrigued by the way that the little town was introduced, because I have read and reviewed some of this author's work before, linked down in the description. And he is really fixated on small towns. I think the last one I read would be considered more of a drama or a literary or a contemporary, one of those kinds of books. But he is definitely focused on the vibe of a small town, that kind of, they're not even big enough to have their own supermarket type towns, and how there are benefits to knowing a lot of people, but there are a lot of downsides. Like I mentioned before, you have the sheriff with the paranoia and going after the new people just because they're new. You have Cliff, who is blind to a lot of the faults of his small town. He thinks everything's just been fine, and his wife has to be like, no, when we moved back here and I was the new person, no, they were shitty to me. And there's also, low-key, there might be a race thing there, because Naomi and her kids are black. and I believe the book mentions that like they're the only black people in town, more or less. And the author is white, so I don't know that I would have wanted him to do some big theme of racism, and I believe the Daws are all white as well, so it's not trying to recreate any kind of racist sheriff memes, although that sheriff probably could be racist. I also hated him. I think I also put "fuck you, sheriff" in my notes. But it was that kind of, the fuck you characters were characters in a way where, yeah, they angered me, but they were antagonists and their actions moved the story. So it's one of those, yeah, fuck you, but I understand why they have to do that for things to progress. But also just, again, fuck you. So that was fun. And in general, I gave this book 5 stars. Big fan of this author's work. I would love to see maybe a different setting in the future, because he has done so much with small towns, but who knows, there's probably a lot more to dig up about a small town and that kind of Midwest feeling like you're stuck in a small town for no other reason than the idea of leaving feels impossible, because they talk about that a lot. Like Allison talks about how, you know, I'm never going to leave here, even though she's 19 and could very easily move away, but she just feels like she's trapped. And you have Kaya, who's debating whether or not to go to college, and can she leave? Can she escape New Haven? All of that kind of vibe. Just in general, a great pick, very spooky, fairly short-ish, and horror is one of the few genres that I actually don't mind if it's shorter, because it is a genre that thrives, and I guess thrillers as well, thrive on what you don't see, on what characters don't say, on what is left unsolved. You're supposed to be unsettled and have questions at the end of something like this. So I will usually accept shorter horror and thriller books specifically because of that. And this one did a great job of that. I will definitely be continuing with the series if the author would like to give me the next one. I also like that it's a trilogy, so I have not signed myself up for a giant long series. I keep accidentally doing that. Regardless, definitely check this one out if you want some extra spookiness in your life. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.